The courtroom was calm that morning, the kind of calm that only existed before something unforgettable. Papers shuffled, the sound of shoes echoed softly on the polished floor, and Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses as he prepared for another routine case. But the moment the clerk called the next name, the tone shifted. "Mrs. Eleanor Rossi," the clerk announced. Heads turned as a frail woman slowly made her way to the front. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her small black purse, its leather worn, its handle held together by a piece of faded thread. Her back was bent from age, her steps uncertain, yet her eyes carried a quiet strength that caught even the judge's attention. "Good morning, ma'am," Judge Caprio greeted, his familiar warmth filling the room. "How are you today?" Eleanor tried to smile. "Oh, I'm all right, Your Honor." Her voice was soft, the kind that could barely rise above the hum of a ceiling fan. Caprio looked at the file in front of him. "It says here you have a parking violation, unpaid for several months. Are you aware of that, ma'am?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I know. I'm not proud of it." The courtroom chuckled lightly. They'd seen hundreds of people explain away fines with excuses. But this woman didn't look like someone making excuses. She looked like someone carrying something heavy, something beyond a ticket. Caprio smiled kindly. "All right. Let's talk about it. Why didn't you pay the fine?" That's when her hands began to shake a little more. She looked down at her purse, then back up at him. "Because, Your Honor," she said, voice quivering, "I couldn't." The words hung in the air. It wasn't just the tone, it was the honesty in it. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only quiet truth. "I wanted to," she continued, "but the money I had went to my grandson's medicine. He's been sick. I thought I'd pay it next month, but then," her words trailed off, swallowed by the stillness. Judge Caprio's smile faded. His eyes softened, his posture straightened. For a moment he didn't speak. In that silence, the courtroom stopped being a place of law. It became a place of hearts holding their breath. And as he looked at her again, everyone could sense it. This wasn't going to be just another case. Something was about to happen that would stay with him forever. Mrs. Eleanor Rossi was 82 years old, a grandmother with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun, her clothes simple but clean, her shoes worn down at the heels. To anyone passing her on the street, she might have seemed like any other elderly woman trying to make it through the day. But those who knew her story understood she carried more than years on her shoulders. She carried the weight of 2 young lives that depended entirely on her. Her daughter, Angela, had died 3 years earlier in a car accident, leaving behind 2 children, Marco, who was 12, and little Sophia, just 7 at the time. Since that day, Eleanor had refused to let them go into foster care. "They've lost enough," she often said. "I'll take care of them until my last breath." But taking care of them meant fighting time itself. Her hands, swollen from arthritis, ached every morning as she tied Sophia's shoelaces or packed Marco's lunch. She worked part-time at a small bakery downtown, kneading dough before sunrise and smiling through the pain. Every dollar she earned was divided like a prayer: rent, food, school supplies, and the endless cycle of medicine for Marco's weak lungs. The parking ticket that brought her to Judge Caprio's courtroom wasn't the kind of mistake born from carelessness. It was born from love. That morning, she had parked outside the children's hospital after getting a call from Marco's school nurse. His breathing had worsened, and she had driven straight there, forgetting about the parking meter entirely. Now, as she stood before the judge, she tried to appear calm, but her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her purse strap, betraying the fear underneath. Judge Caprio, known across the country for his compassion and humor, looked at her kindly. "Mrs. Rossi," he said gently, "it's good to see you today. I hope this isn't your first time in my courtroom." She smiled faintly. "It is, Your Honor. And I pray it's my last." The room laughed softly, even the judge chuckled, but the warmth didn't last long. Caprio flipped through her case file, noting the unpaid fines, the repeated extensions, the small handwritten notes she had sent explaining her circumstances. "You've been asking for more time to pay since last year," he said. "You've never ignored us. You've been honest every time." Eleanor nodded. "I try, sir. I just run out of time before I run out of bills." Her words carried no self-pity, only quiet truth. Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. He had heard excuses before, thousands of them. But this wasn't an excuse. It was survival. And what he didn't yet know, what no one in that room could have guessed, was that behind this grandmother's weary smile lay a story that would challenge everything he believed about mercy. Judge Caprio looked down at the case file again, then back up at the woman before him. "Mrs. Rossi," he began gently, I can see here that your parking ticket hasn't been paid for quite some time. Is there a reason you haven't been able to take care of it? Eleanor's fingers twisted the strap of her purse again. Her voice came out small, almost apologetic. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't forget. I just couldn't. He tilted his head slightly. Couldn't? She nodded, eyes still fixed on the bench. I had to choose. My medicine, or my grandson's. The courtroom went completely still. Even the faint hum of the air vents seemed to fade. Caprio blinked, his expression softening. Your grandson's treatment? Eleanor took a shaky breath. Yes. Marco's lungs, they're weak. He gets these infections that make it hard for him to breathe. The hospital bills keep coming even with the help we get. Every month it's something new, another prescription, another machine to help him sleep. She paused, her voice trembling but steady with conviction. I'm old, Your Honor. My medicine keeps me moving. But his medicine keeps him alive. So, I did what any grandmother would do. Caprio exhaled slowly, his hand resting on his chin. That's a heavy burden to carry, he said softly. You must be one strong lady to raise 2 kids at your age. For a brief moment, the courtroom brightened with his familiar warmth, a small attempt to lighten the moment. But Eleanor didn't smile. She lifted her eyes toward him, and the weight in them silenced even his humor. I don't feel strong anymore, Your Honor, she said. I just don't want them to think I gave up. The words struck the room like a bell, gentle but impossible to ignore. Caprio leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Rossi, he said, his tone quieter now, how long have you been taking care of your grandchildren? Since their mother passed, she said, her voice barely a whisper. 3 years now. Every day I wake up and tell myself it's going to get easier. But it never does. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. I used to think that if I just worked harder, if I kept smiling, maybe the world would notice and give us a break. But it doesn't, Your Honor. It just keeps asking more. Caprio swallowed hard. His usual courtroom composure wavered for a moment. He had faced countless cases of hardship before, but something about this one, about this fragile woman who had given everything and still felt it wasn't enough, hit him differently. He looked down, fiddling with his pen, pretending to read. But everyone could see it, the emotion in his eyes, the quiet battle in his chest. And while no one dared speak, one truth settled over the room. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who are simply too tired to admit they're breaking. He folded his hands and took a breath before speaking again. Mrs. Rossi, he said softly, you've told me a lot about your grandchildren and the struggles you've been through. But I want to understand what happened that day, the day you got this ticket. Can you tell me where you were going? Eleanor hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the floor. Her lips pressed together as if she were holding something back, something too painful to speak aloud. Finally she whispered, I wasn't going anywhere, Your Honor. I had already arrived. Caprio furrowed his brow. Arrived? She nodded slowly. At the corner of Elm and Mason Street. He looked at his file again, tracing the printed address. That's where the ticket was issued, he said. It says the car was parked for over an hour. Her voice broke. Yes, sir. I know. Caprio leaned forward, his tone still gentle. What were you doing there? Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 years of silence. That's where my daughter died, Your Honor. The words rippled through the courtroom like a sudden gust of wind, invisible, yet strong enough to shake everyone present. I go there every week, she continued softly. Every Sunday morning before work. I bring flowers, the ones that don't sell at the bakery. I sit by the curb and I talk to her. I tell her about the kids, about how Marco's getting better, and how Sophia finally learned to tie her shoes. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't stop talking. That day I lost track of time. I was praying for her like I always do. I didn't even notice the parking officer standing there until it was too late. When I came back to the car, the ticket was already there, the paper flapping in the wind where she took her last breath. The courtroom fell into a silence so deep it felt sacred. Caprio blinked rapidly, his voice faltering. Your daughter, that same street? Eleanor nodded, clutching her purse tightly to her chest as though it could keep her from falling apart. Yes, Your Honor. That same one. Her next words came out in fragments, soft, trembling, almost carried away by the still air. I know it's just a fine. I know the law has to be fair. But sometimes, I just wish the world could remember her the way I do. She wasn't careless. She was just tired. She worked 2 jobs. She was driving home to see her kids. And now, every time I go there, I feel like I'm keeping her alive. Caprio's throat tightened. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, trying to steady himself. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the glasses back down on the bench. Eleanor lowered her head, whispering almost to herself, "I just wish she could see I'm still trying." The sound of those words broke something in the room. Even the bailiff, a man who had stood through years of confessions, anger, and apologies, looked away, swallowing hard. Caprio turned his head for a moment, looking toward the tall courtroom windows where daylight poured in. His voice, when it finally returned, was barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Rossi," he said, "you don't have to wish. I think she knows." And for the first time that morning, Judge Frank Caprio, the man known for holding this courtroom together, fell completely silent. For several moments he said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman before him, the weight of her story pressing on every inch of the room. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was reverent. The kind of silence that makes everyone feel smaller in the presence of something profoundly human. Finally he leaned forward, his voice softer than before. "Mrs. Rossi, I've been sitting in this chair for many years. I've heard stories that broke my heart, stories that made me laugh, and stories that reminded me why I do this job. But what you've shared today," he paused, his voice catching slightly, "it's something I won't forget." Eleanor looked up at him through misty eyes. "I didn't mean to make anyone sad, Your Honor," she whispered. "I just wanted you to understand." Caprio nodded slowly. "And I do. More than you know." He picked up the case file, the thin stack of papers that, moments ago, had seemed to represent a simple traffic violation. Now it looked absurd, paper against pain, ink against love. "The law," he said, "is supposed to be equal. It treats every case the same way whether you're rich or poor, young or old. But justice," he paused again, his eyes glistening, "justice has a heart. And today that heart belongs to you. This fine," he continued, holding the paper between his fingers, "no longer represents disobedience. It represents devotion. It represents a grandmother who has given her life for the people she loves. And for that, I can't in good conscience punish you." He set the paper down, folded his hands, and spoke with quiet finality. "The court hereby dismisses this case. You owe nothing." A ripple went through the courtroom, a collective sigh, part relief, part disbelief. Eleanor's lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor. You don't know what this means." But Caprio wasn't finished. "Actually," he said, glancing at his bailiff, "I have one more order." The bailiff looked up, startled. Caprio continued, "I want the courtroom fund to send Mrs. Rossi some grocery gift cards and gas cards. She's done enough sacrificing. Let's help her breathe a little easier." The bailiff nodded, moved. The courtroom erupted in soft applause, not loud or forced but pure. It wasn't for the judge or even for the verdict. It was for the moment, the reminder that kindness could still exist in places ruled by rules. Caprio looked at Eleanor again and smiled through the emotion in his voice. "You remind me of my mother," he said. "She had that same quiet strength. I hope she's proud of what I just did today." Eleanor's tears finally fell, her body trembling as she mouthed a final "thank you." And in that moment, as sunlight poured through the tall courtroom windows, it felt less like a legal decision, and more like grace itself. Weeks after the verdict, the video of that day began to spread, first across local news stations, then across the world. The thumbnail alone drew millions. An old woman wiping tears, a judge leaning forward, his hand resting gently on the bench. But it wasn't the image that captured hearts, it was the silence. That sacred pause after her plea, when even justice itself seemed to bow before compassion. Comment sections flooded with emotion. People from every corner of the globe shared their stories. Sons missing their mothers, daughters remembering their grandmothers, strangers writing, "This is what humanity looks like." Within days the clip was being called, "The Day Justice Had Tears." Reporters reached out to Judge Caprio for interviews, asking what went through his mind in that moment. His response was simple. "The law can punish wrongdoing," he said, "but only mercy can heal it." Eleanor Rossi never expected her day in court to go viral. When the news crew found her, she was back at the bakery, rolling dough with the same tired but steady hands. She smiled shyly when asked about the judge's kindness. "He didn't see an old woman who broke a rule," she said softly. "He saw a mother who never stopped trying to love." A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at the courthouse. It was from Marco and Sophia, her grandchildren. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged in places. Read, "Dear Judge Caprio, thank you for helping our grandma. She cried that night, but she said they were good tears. You gave her back her hope. Now we know there are good people in this world. The judge kept that letter in his desk, folded neatly beside the courtroom gavel. Every so often he would take it out and reread it, not to remember the case but to remind himself that justice is not always about what the law allows, but about what the heart understands. And so, friends, as we close this story, take a moment to think about this. In a world chasing power and punishment, have we forgotten that mercy is power too? Have we forgotten that one act of grace can ripple through lives we'll never see? If this story touched your heart, share it. Let someone else feel the reminder that kindness is not weakness, it's courage in its purest form. Because that day in a quiet Rhode Island courtroom, an old woman taught us something that no law book ever could. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes, it kneels beside a grandmother and calls her brave. And in our next story, a father's confession will leave even Judge Caprio speechless.